So I changed up the background behind me a little bit. I found this picture of Muhammad Ali standing over Sonny Liston for only $20, and I could not pass it up. But don't worry, old John Prine, he's still with us. The same day that I found that Muhammad Ali photo, I also found a Muhammad Ali shirt. And it just got me to thinking about Muhammad Ali and what an influence that he's been on my life. Now, I've been a boxing fan my entire life. I don't ever remember not watching boxing. It was always on. And I grew up during the Tyson era, and that was a great time to be a kid and a great time to watch boxing because it was so exciting. I mean, Mike Tyson fights was always so explosive and so wild and crazy. And a lot of times the entrance and the ring introduction will be longer than the fight. So there was no need to actually buy the pay-per-views of Tyson. Hell, you could watch the highlight reel the next day on ESPN. You'd see the whole fight. But I always loved going back and watching those classic tapes. I loved watching Ali fight Liston and Frazier and Foreman, and loved going back even further than that and watching Rocky Marciano and Jersey Joe Walcott, the Joe Louis years, Jack Dempsey and Gene Tunney. I always thought Gene Tunney was criminally underrated, but I'm not going to nerd out on boxing. I just loved watching those old fights, and I loved hearing guys like Burt Sugar and Angelo Dundee and Eddie Futch sit around and talk about it and debate it, and I could talk about it and debate it all day long. But my grandfather, he could not stand Muhammad Ali. He always referred to him as Cassius Clay. He refused to call him Muhammad Ali. And he resented him because Ali didn't go to Vietnam. Now, I had an uncle who did. He made it back and everything. But my grandpa would say, you know, my son had to go. Why did this rich, entitled athlete get a pass? Well, I would always hear my grandpa talk about that, and I could have just took his word for it, and I would have went the rest of my life believing that. But me being me, I just had to dig into that a little bit deeper because I said to myself, you know, there had to have been a bigger reason than that. I mean, why would a guy give up the world title and give up his prime? If he could fight men in the ring, why wouldn't he fight in a war? And then when I dug in and deep dived it and figured out why Muhammad Ali didn't go, then I was like, wow, that's admirable. I mean, he was right. He was spot on. When you hear him talking about, I ain't got no quarrel with those Viet Cong. I mean, this guy gave up 3 years of his absolute prime. He was at his peak. When he fought, if you go back and watch the fights where he fought Cleveland Williams and Zora Foley, Muhammad Ali was at his absolute peak right there. He was a masterful fighter. He destroyed Cleveland Williams and Zora Foley. And in any other time or any other era, those guys would have been big names. If Muhammad Ali hadn't came through their era, we would probably be talking about Cleveland Williams and Zora Foley a lot more than we do now. But he just demolished them. He was a masterful fighter. And right at the height of his career, when he was in his prime and at his peak, he gave up the World Heavyweight Championship because he wouldn't take part in a war that he didn't believe in. And he lost it all. And he went all the way back down to the bottom. And there was people calling him a draft dodger and calling him, you know, a coward and all these things. And I've always made the argument that he didn't dodge the draft. He went down there and faced it. He went down to the draft board and said, no, I'm not going to do it. And at the time, you know, I wasn't alive, of course, but I've talked to my mom about it, and my mom has talked about how hated he was at that particular point in time and how happy people were when Joe Frazier beat him in his comeback fight in Madison Square Garden, the fight of the century. I mean, when Frazier left hooked Ali and landed him flat on his back, I mean, the place erupted, because there was a whole bunch of redneck people in that crowd just glad to see this guy finally get what was coming to him. It took Muhammad Ali till 1974 when he finally beat George Foreman to regain the title that they took from him all those years ago. And I hear people today talk about how they admire Muhammad Ali and they look up to Muhammad Ali. And I know guys like, yeah, man, I looked up to him ever since I was a kid. And yet these same people will sit and they will give black athletes a hard time these days if they speak out. If someone protests, if someone takes a knee. A guy like Colin Kaepernick takes a knee, people today will lose their mind. If LeBron James speaks out, they'll say he should just bounce that basketball and shut up. And they're the same people that will tell me that they would have been for Muhammad Ali. Now let's just imagine for sake of the argument that today a young guy named Cassius Clay came along. And let's say that he started being very outspoken. And let's say that he changed his name to Muhammad Ali. And let's say that he refused to fight a war that the Republican Party wanted to be part of. Let's say that he refused to fight a war that Donald Trump thought was necessary. Do you honestly think that MAGA Republicans would have supported that guy? It's one of those arguments when I hear it and see it. I understand that the kids today probably don't understand or know about Muhammad Ali, but when guys my age and older tries to act like that they would have been big fans of him and cheering him on. I'm like, no, you would have been one of the guys cheering when Joe Frazier left, hooked him, and laid him flat of his back. You would have definitely been rooting for Frazier. But Muhammad Ali was willing to give up everything. He was willing to give all of it up for that stance that he believed in. And everybody turned their back on him. Everybody turned their back on him, and he lived hand to mouth for a while. He had to go around making speeches until he finally was able to get his boxing license back. And I went to his grave and stood at it. And it was one of the most humbling moments because he just had a profound impact on my life. And to me, while Mike Tyson fights might have been wild and crazy and explosive, there was always a lesson to me to be learned from Ali's fights. They always transcended boxing. They were always bigger than boxing to me. When I saw Muhammad Ali doing the float like a butterfly, I would apply that to real life. I would say to myself in certain situations, I need to move. I need to run. I need to stick. I need to move. I need to outsmart my opponent. And then when I saw him use the rope-a-dope on George Foreman, there was a lesson there to me. He was able to change his fighting style mid-fight. And he did that several times. That wasn't the only time he did it. There were so many times he would come out with a certain way of going about it. And when he realized this isn't working, he would change it up mid-match and end up knocking the person out. That's what he did to George Foreman. He goes out there, if you ever watch that Rumble in the Jungle in Zaire, he goes out there and the very first thing he does is he throws a right hand and connects with it. First punch he throws, it's a right hand, which is telling George Foreman, I don't respect your power. Everybody starts off with the jab. To start with the cross tells your opponent, I don't respect your power. He did that. And then there's this spot where Foreman just catches him in the neck and you could hear him grunt and he retreats. And he goes back on the ropes and he just lays there like this and he keeps his guard up and he just lets Foreman keep hammering away until finally Foreman runs out of gas and he knocks him out. I can't count the time in my life that I've been up against a certain situation in my life and people would say to me, why are you sitting there taking that? Why are you sitting there taking this from these people? Why are you letting them continue to hammer away at you? And I would say, I'm rope-a-doping them. I'm going to wear them out. And when the time is right, I'm going to knock them out. That's what Muhammad Ali meant to me. He transcended boxing. He was bigger than that to me. And when he passed away, it was like losing a family member or just a big part of me went, because I just spent a lifetime from childhood going, there's more to that guy. There's more to that guy than that famous photo. That famous photo is iconic, and it always will be. But there's a lot about that photo a lot of people don't know. There was so much riding on the line in that fight. Now, if you just looked at it, you would think he's saying to him, hey, I knocked you out, sucker. You shouldn't have never messed with me. He was actually screaming at him and telling him to get up. He was saying, get up, they're going to think it's a fix. Because you had the black Muslims was after Liston. The mob was after Ali. He was scared to death as a young man right there in the middle of that ring. He was absolutely scared to death. But he kept on going. And he kept on taking a stand for what he believed in, and he never backed down. And when people says to me, well, you might lose something. You might lose a friend. You might lose a gig. You might lose an opportunity because you make these YouTube videos. I always go back to that. And I'm like, you know what? If that guy can give up the prime of his life for his stance, I can give up some gig at Bob's Country Bunker behind the chicken wire. I think I can live without that one.